Yeah, so really very happy to be here again. And I do come a couple times a year as a guest facilitator on Sundays, and I had taught mindfulness-based stress reduction here a few times before the pandemic, which kind of gets a little bit into my background that I teach different mindfulness-based interventions, and somehow became fascinated by stress, and now I'm more focused on anxiety, the topic of anxiety, which is related to uncertainty, things that come and go, and I wasn't always so comfortable. Also teach about mindful eating, and my background is really, I'm an artist, and I have worked in feature animated films and TV commercials up in Los Angeles for like 25 years or so. And there's so much about the art of filmmaking that seems like a great background. From my own direct experience, to be guiding folks in meditation and related to storytelling, things that fade in, fade out, past, future, suspense, cliffhangers, all sorts of things that relate. So this idea of coming on down here today felt really just great, just to like get in my car, come on down here, and setting the conditions to be like early. Gonna have like a smooth ride down here. A couple times I've been just, I leave early and then there's always traffic, or I just leave a little bit too late. And I always think I'm going to get this right, including today, setting the conditions for a smooth ride. And I have this, the topic, clear seeing in meditation and daily life. And before I left, I saw something written down about the smooth ride, the story of a smooth ride of, which I'll tell you about in just a minute, but that just seemed like a great way to begin, that I had planned on being here to set the conditions. And it felt really good. Like it feels really good to like not be late, to not have stress, to not have anxiety, right? Like you're going somewhere, especially to guide folks. And it's like to be on time. And it doesn't feel good. It's like this opposite feeling, like it's kind of a bumpy ride. Like it does not feel good. The drive down here, it's like, am I going to be late? You see the minutes on the GPS ticking to be, like, I'm going to be 15 minutes early, then 10 minutes, then 5 minutes. And then I start to feel like rumbly in my stomach. And so that doesn't feel good. And it can cause this cloudiness, this lack of clear seeing in everyday life. These are the kinds of things that can cloud the mind and go into storytelling, like, oh, I'm going to be late. I have to like, just little things like that. So I practice with this and know everything's going to be okay. But it's just an example of something that can happen. And I just want to share also that I was way early, but I discovered I had to buy gas. And it was empty. And there was this big like jam to get the gas. Once I got in to get the gas, there was like a jam in there, and then there was an open spot. I get there and there's like, it says out of order. So I had to back out. It was fun. I had like plenty of time. I wasn't even looking at the time at this point. And then I get the gas and I'm driving away and I look, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna, I have 10 minutes. I'm gonna be here 10 minutes early, but that can easily dissipate from Silver Lake to here. And that's where the stress came in. So I was also, once I got off the freeway and I saw that actually things were going pretty good, I was still going to be 10 minutes early. And it's just amazing how something just opened up. Like for a good part of the trip, it was like this bumpy ride. Didn't feel great, but I handled it. I had equanimity, did my practice. And then it did open up. There was this feeling, it felt better, it just felt so much better. And I get off the, I think it's the 405 or to get here. And the first thing I saw was that the gas prices were more expensive here, and that made me feel a lot better. It's like, wow, look, Long Beach has more expensive gas. So good thing I got it. Good thing I got it before I came on down here. So so this is everyday life. So I wanted to share that. Maybe it's relatable, and that that there's this idea of clear seeing, like that we can see clearly and feel differently when we see clearly. So I'd ask, like, maybe how does it feel when you're like maybe just in the present with your breath, you're present with your posture, with whatever your experience is, versus when your mind wanders? Can you actually feel the difference, maybe in meditation, or like in my experience in daily life, to know that there was something that was clouding my mind versus just smooth sailing? And in fact, breathing easier. I remember said that to myself. It's like, wow, I can breathe easy now. And that we might have those experiences that we have throughout our day and in meditation. And we can set the conditions, do our best to set the conditions for smooth sailing. And that's the best we can do, really. At some point, things just happen. And this brings me to the word. It comes from Pali, and the ancient language of from the Buddha's time, of dukkha. And the word origin for dukkha that I've learned from reliable sources, that the word ka is like an axle. It literally meant, this is the idiomatic backstory, before it became commonly known as unsatisfactoriness or suffering. One of the key components that we might observe in Buddhism are suffering, and other suffering, the suffering of the world. And that the ka is an axle of a wheel, and that when it is not trued, the wheel is going to be bumpy. You're going to have this bumpy ride. So that dukkha, before it kind of became part at an earlier time, it just meant like a bumpy wheel. And that you might, I know for myself, when I know this definition, I can actually feel that there's an experiential, literal meaning of that word, bumpy ride, like dukkha, 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 dukkha. It's like a bumpy ride. And so that's the ka with the du, which means, I guess, bad or untrue. And then on the other end, the same root word ka, when they put the like a prefix su or su, it means good wheel, good axle. And sukha is like a smooth ride. So experientially, like this kind of metaphor of this language came from like a cart, the wheel of a cart, or an ox cart, or a chariot, actually, something that people rode in. So fascinating to know that people like had chariots and carts, and so many things that seemed somewhat modern back then. And these were the references. And so this experiential definition for me, I remember when I learned this, like, oh, wow, it's like a bumpy ride or a smooth ride. And that what can we do to set our conditions for that smooth ride or bumpy ride? And we can do our very best, and things, are going to happen. There may be turbulence. And so this was a quote that I saw that reminded me right before I left, it was shared from a teacher, Robin Baudet, that sukha, also, another way of putting it is to be prepared to ride out turbulence without suffering. Because there's going to be turbulence. So can we be prepared, maybe spiritually or inwardly, knowing that there will be turbulence, and still be able to ride out that turbulence without suffering? So maybe, if you've ever flown on a plane or been on a train, that when it gets really bumpy, it's okay. It's okay. For other people, it could be really scary. I know I've been in a lot of turbulence where it was a little frightening, but also knowing that everything's going to be okay. There can be can it be okay? Is there still some kind of way to be with the turbulence and still enjoy the ride, to have some kind of smooth ride along the way? And that it becomes more of a spiritual thing than a physical thing, because there are bumps along the way. And then can that allow us, can we still see clearly? And oftentimes those bumps along the way can interrupt and fog our clear seeing. And it could just be everyday life that we have the habit of thinking. I know I do. Anyone else like thinking? It's like taking a walk or taking a shower, brushing teeth, everyday things. It's normal, it seems, for the mind to wander. So oftentimes it's planning, oftentimes it's remembering. I had to give 2 talks today, one earlier. And so I was especially, for some reason, I had a lot of thoughts about the other one earlier today. I was a little bit, had stage fright. So it was kind of clouding my mind. And once I got on Zoom for that particular event, everything went well. But I couldn't, just be honest, like I had a lot of cloudy thinking and stage fright and uncertainty, that anxiety that lifted. It was just lifted. It was like fog that lifted. Last week, Long Beach Meditation offered a retreat up at Yokoji Zen Mountain Center. And I went, and Travis was there. I don't know if some other folks were there, but when we arrived, it was the day after there was a rain, this late April rain, and it was completely covered with fog, and there was snow up there, and it was beautiful. And that night we had our first sitting, and in the Zendo, the meditation hall, and just amazingly, when we came out, all that fog had completely lifted, and way out there in the mountains, the sky was just crystal clear. You could see the Milky Way. It was freezing, but it was crystal clear.
There was snow.
And there was snow. And then interestingly, the next day it warmed up and it was crystal clear and the snow melted. So there were, these things that kind of come and go. One of the basic teachings to just know is true, that things rise and pass away. And even, these clouds will go and we see clearly, and it could be that the next day more clouds will come. And I'd like to share a little bit of ancient wisdom and modern science, and coming from this mindfulness-based intervention background, we learn a lot about both. And on the ancient wisdom side, I just to share that I just recently graduated from a Buddhist eco-chaplaincy program. So I've done a lot of study with Buddhism, and to share with joy from my teacher, Gil Fronsdal up at the Sati Center, who we spent a couple of weeks also doing live retreats. And it was really focusing on the environment. And so, this idea of clear seeing out in nature, and nature itself it means a lot to me. And it can be very clarifying to even just sit outside in everyday life, at home, to do a little practice outdoors, something I highly recommend. Sometimes it could be unbelievably clear, and we hear birds, we have sounds, we have wind, things that we don't have inside. Just a little side note. But getting back to that little bit of science and modern wisdom, that there's research by Harvard by a guy named Matt Killingsworth, and he had thousands of people around the world that he had some kind of cell phone app, and polled them in all activities, asked them how often their minds wandered. And so the result was, on average, people in this extensive research from all over the world had 47% of the time their mind was wandering, 47% as an average. And on top of that, their mind was wandering and they were not happy. There was some negative, like ruminating or slight unhappiness. And so the name of the research, I think, says a lot. It kind of says everything in the one sentence, that a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. And then we may be able to flip that to say that a present mind is a happier mind. And of course, all these things, we have to know for ourselves. Like, I don't necessarily believe all these research, but it's like, oh, just like it's certain, that's the invitation teachings, whether you're into secular mindfulness or Buddhist teachings, that there's an invitation to discover for ourselves with direct experience, to like take the bite, of the fruit and taste it for ourselves. Don't take the word of the fruit salesperson. We have to, the fruit salesperson could say, oh, this apple or this fruit, let's say this fruit we've never tried, tastes like kind of half like a strawberry and half like an apple. It's like, huh? You have to try it for yourself. You can't just believe somebody and then see, okay, does it taste like that? And we know from ourselves. So does mind wandering, are we mind wandering 47% of the time or 30% or whatever? Isn't really so much the point, but it's a lot. And that you might know for yourself, are you happier? How does it feel? Does it feel better when your mind is wandering and spinning, or does it feel better when you're present? And the research showed that people were happier when they were present, even when they were doing activities that they didn't like commuting, which is how my story began. So a lot of people don't like commuting, but just being present, they reported they're happier to some extent. Or taking out the garbage or doing tasks that they don't like, that being present was a way of being a little happier. And so wanting to tie this back to this dukkha, which in some translations, people will call unsatisfactoriness or suffering. And then the sukha is a kind of happiness, like an intrinsic happiness. It may not be the same as like Western happiness, but maybe it is. It's a sort of being pleasant and open and uncontracted, whereas maybe dukkha is more like contracted, anxious, tight. And even the word anxious, the root word, the etymology, which has a link to Sanskrit and European language, they call it Proto-Indo-European. The ang part means to be choked or squeezed. So if you heard that, it was like, wow, that sounds like anxiety. The feeling of uncertainty that goes back thousands of years to different languages means to be choked or squeezed, which sounds a little bit like unsatisfactoriness. And so, so this idea of knowing, like, if we are not present, we're not clear, are we less happy? And if we have, anxieties or rumination in our mind, do we feel a little more contracted, even a little bit, versus when we're more present and relaxed and open, do we feel a little bit calmer, more pleasing? So there's a lot of storytelling that can go on in our busy minds, and sometimes it's like a committee member in our heads. It could be like a committee member. And I don't know about you, does anybody else have like different committee members? But this idea that, there could be like 10 and one of them, they all agree, like, no, don't eat the ice cream. And then there's the one that says, no, eat the whole thing, and they win. So there could be different voices in there. It's not like I'm like admitting to like I'm a little crazy, but maybe a little bit. But this is a normal thing for us to have different voices. Is this kind of okay to kind of just put it? I know it's just falling off. Okay, sorry. So the committee members, there could be a lot of them, and just one of them could be the one that wins. And I don't know, anyone, does that sound familiar to anybody? Yes, I see a couple of heads shaking, maybe out there too. And so, and there's also some committee members that I don't know, to speak for myself, that will say, that I should, you should have done this. Oh, I did have that committee member when I was driving down here and said, oh, you should have left earlier. But you should. And then it's kind of this kind of silly thing that we can like, it's like shooting all over myself, like literally shooting all over myself. And it's like, sometimes it's good just to notice that. It's like, oh, there it is. I'm shooting all over myself. And there's the difference right there, is being lost in the shooting, like when I'm driving. It does sound like I'm swearing, but I am saying shooting. So, being on autopilot with shooting versus like, oh, there it is. And that's sort of like the big difference right there. And suddenly I'm now present. as opposed to feeling really yucky about this ruminating. Now I'm feeling less yucky because I'm present. So there's an example. So there may be things that happen during the meditation, when we're sitting in meditation, that are a lot like these things, but it also can be in everyday life. And so there's a story. It happens to be that it turns out, I never realized it until more recently, that there's a lot of storytelling that if you're like me, we all tell a lot of stories to ourselves. And how many of those stories are leading us towards a bumpy road or a smooth road? And is it possible that we just can notice, become present, and then think of it as like, here, I'm telling a story about driving, but literally at that moment, if we say, oh, is this making me go in a bumpy road or a smooth road? Is this story even true? Is it just making me ruminate and not feel good? Then it's like a fork in the road, and we have a choice. And the choice is, oh, you know what? I think I'll go this way. I'll go the way that's a little smoother. And that might be easier said than done. But at least there's a choice that we can start to make the choice. And the more we see the choice, and we're not lost in the rumination, not lost in the stories, then there is that opportunity to keep, taking the smooth road. And there's so many metaphors in Buddhism are so beautiful about nature. It's like a deer path. We could just say, sometimes our habitual patterns are to take this deer path of negativity or ruminating. And even, the mind is hungry. It wants to always be active and have stories, it seems. And so maybe we notice that. Maybe you notice that meditation, to settle down, to follow the breath. It's like, hey, where are my stories? I want stories. And but we can notice that this is a way to come to settle, to come to a place that feels better. It may feel better. And that's like, does this feel better? To take a little bit of time to settle and to stop feeding the mind with our own stories and preoccupations. And even the word rumination, another etymology, fun fact, is that the word rumination comes from animals that chew on their cud. So that rumination is literally chewing. So when we ruminate, we might think, oh, we're chewing on thought, that we're like kind of feeding ourselves and we're chewing on thought. And it kind of relates to this story. You might have heard it. I have like kind of a very generic version. It's called the parable of the two wolves, that a grandparent is talking with their grandchild and says, there are two wolves inside of us, and that they're kind of having a battle. They're always at battle, these two wolves. And one is a friendly wolf, and this one represents things like kindness, bravery, and love. That sounds like a friendly wolf. And the other is a selfish wolf, which represents things like greed, hatred, and fear. And the grandchild stops and thinks about it for a second, and then looks up at their grandparents and says, well, they're always battling, which one wins? And the grandparent says, the one you feed. And so this possibility that we are feeding our own, greed and hatred and fear, or ruminating, this chewing. But once we can get lost in it. Once we know that we're lost in it, we see it. It's like, there you are, I see clearly. Finally getting to the theme of my talk, seeing clearly. We see clearly that, and we have a choice. There's that fork in the road. And sometimes we see it, and I know for myself, I'll see things like, oh, I shouldn't have that other scoop of ice cream, but I do it anyway. Other times, like, I have a choice, and I'm going to go on the healthy route tonight. So there's these choices that we might come up with every day. We see this perhaps in our meditation, that when our mind wanders or we start telling stories, like, oh, we could note that. I come from more of the Theravada background, and so there's the practice of noting, that we can just note. And even in the instructions from the Satipatthana Sutta, the four establishments of mindfulness, establishments of awareness, there's the instruction to know when you are breathing, know when you're sitting, know when you're standing. So there's this knowing. And there's also that fading away from the knowing, and the fading away is perfectly normal. But when the knowing comes back, this is the establishment of mindfulness, that we're establishing that knowing, and that's where we can make that choice to go the bumpy road, perhaps, or the smooth road. And so just want to share, like, what does get in the way of, just checking our time. Okay. What does get in the way? Some other things, some classical things that get in the way besides some of the things I've shared. Just, it feels like worth sharing that we might notice we're lost in stories. Before I go on to some of those other things, just to share that one of the tasks that we can do, and I think I've already shared this, is like a task, is that we can simply recognize and acknowledge that our mind has wandered, or that we're in a state of storytelling. And just when we do that, just by doing that, we change relationship. We literally change relationship just by acknowledging that. And so we go from being lost and distracted to being aware. And then the second task is to remember. And I think I also just kind of shared this, that we can remember to make that choice. And so that can be to return to being present for the breath, for sounds, for body sensations, to be present and to see, what does that feel like? How does that feel? Does it feel different to be present? And so, reading a quote from my teacher I mentioned earlier, Gil Fronsdal, we can put down what we're carrying, a deepest kind of letting go, a transformation to inner peace that becomes a reference point, like a plant that grows and blossoms within us, that we can water and grow. So there's this cultivating, so many beautiful metaphors around cultivation in Buddhism. And so every time we do these practices, it could be cultivating these seeds, and discover that there may be peace already there, and what's getting in the way are our stories, which really can be represented as clouds or any kind of obstacle. And so some of those obstacles, classical obstacles, that come from Buddhism have beautiful water metaphors. So some of the classical, there are the five hindrances, and that could be desire, wanting, craving, and also aversion or hate, restlessness and worry. Those are kind of together. And then the other are sleepy or sluggishness, sometimes called sloth and torpor. And then the last one is doubt. And then what's so great about, there's this metaphor with clear seeing that the Buddha teaches about using clear water that reflects as the metaphor. So we have clear seeing is when we're mindful and completely aware, and that these hindrances, that desire is like when the water is dyed red, and anger or aversion is like the water boiling. So we're not seeing clearly on either. And then restlessness and worry is like the surface of a lake that's choppy, so it no longer reflects. And then doubt, so sluggishness and sleepiness is like water that's filled with algae and plants, so that if you tried to walk through it, you couldn't walk, and it's completely unclear. And then the last one is doubt, which is muddy water. That doubt is muddy water. And so all of these are 5 classical teachings using water metaphors. And when there is no mud, we see clearly. When there is no algae, the water is clear. When the water is not choppy from wind, we see clearly. When there's no boiling, we see clearly from anger. When there's no red dye through desire, we see clearly. So different, I think, beautiful teachings about the hindrances and seeing clearly. And so everyday practice, I kind of want to end my talk with. something that is an acronym that's taught in different ways. It really comes from Michelle McDonald, who did so much of her study and practice and teaching in Burma. And so she comes from a background where they do noting practice. And noting, I think, is just an amazing practice because it can really clear, for me, it can clear the clouds of my thinking. And I do this when I'm walking. I take walks. But it could be when there's a craving or even when there's feelings of anxiety. And so she came up with this acronym called RAIN. It's often attributed to Sarah Brock, but it's really from Michelle McDonald. And it really, the R stands for recognize. So we recognize what's here. And the A, and if you want to even think of something, maybe if you want to close your eyes and do this with me real briefly, think of something that, whether it's ruminating or an emotional feeling or a craving, and we can just recognize it's here. And once we recognize, we've completely changed relationship with it. We're no longer lost. And then we allow it. We don't run away from it. So often, yucky feelings we want to run away from. But if we allow it just for a moment and investigate, and at the same time, we can note, like, oh, there's thinking. There's a busy mind. Yeah, there's rumination. Or if it's craving, it's like, oh yeah, there's hunger. There's this wave of hunger. And so instead of being in these choppy, wavy waters where we're kind of below, being tumbled by the water, it's like being on a raft suddenly. Now we're on top of the raft. Even though the waters are choppy, we can say, recognize, allow, investigate. We could note. And so instead of being completely lost in it, we're with it, we're exploring it. And it's like a wave. If we do this practice, even for a few minutes, it's possible that the wave will pass, that all things pass. And so something that you might want to try, recognize, allow, investigate, note, connecting with the breath and the body. And so just to offer that, if your eyes are closed and you want to open them. So that's like a short little practice that we could do every day that can help clear the clouds. I know if I'm walking, it's just simply like, oh, I'm thinking. And then I just say, recognize and allow. And then suddenly, I don't know what happens. It's like somebody just opens this curtain because I've told myself, I've instructed myself to like, wake up. You can be clear. There's bougainvillea. Look, there's a view of a mountain. And then, it's amazing. Even in the shower, that's a great place because it's so often to be autopilot, or driving in our cars, brushing teeth, eating is one of the best places. We could be present and sense and savor every bite. And we can sense and savor every breath, sense and savor a wonderful walk, sense and savor a drive. Sense and savor life. Which brings me to a poem, and it's from Thich Nhat Hanh. And I've been reading this for a long time, teaching before like an eating session at a retreat. So we'll do like an hour-long eating, and so I'll just go ahead and read it. It says, you must be completely awake in the present to enjoy the tea. Only in the awareness of the present can your hands feel the pleasant warmth of the cup. Only in the present can you savor the aroma, taste the sweetness, appreciate the delicacy. If you're ruminating about the past or worrying about the future, you'll completely miss the experience of enjoying the cup of tea. You'll look down at the cup and the tea will be gone. Life is like that. If you're not fully present, you'll look around and it will be gone. You'll have missed the feel, the aroma, the delicacy, and the beauty of life. It will seem to be speeding past you. The past is finished. Learn from it and let it go. The future is not even here yet. Plan for it, but do not waste your time worrying about it. Worrying is worthless. And when you stop ruminating about what has already happened, when you stop worrying about what might never happen. Then you'll be in the present moment. Then you will begin to experience joy in life. So I really appreciate that. And I just was realizing, like, I haven't read that since he passed away, and how he feels very alive, that I'm just reading his essence that's carried on, and such wisdom that that we might look at our cup of tea and it'll all be gone. So that's like a message from beyond, from Thich Nhat Hanh. And just wanting to close out by saying there's other short practices. We can just take a few breaths, sometimes just to put our hands on our chest and our heart. We have so many breaths that we have that sustain us. Just sharing one more short poem. 10,000 flowers in spring, the moon in autumn, the cool breeze in summer, snow in winter. If your mind isn't clouded by unnecessary things, this is the best season of your life.